Welcome to the SIWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here again with our lovely guest host, Nora, and we're going to dive back into HR and more on the recruiting process. So, for those that missed the episode on some of the resume stuff and some of the new hire recruiting, you can go back and listen to those. But today we thought we'd talk about interviews, right? And how to ace your interview, how to get through that process, because it can be a nerve-wracking process. And if you're at the stage, then congrats, because the resume process, I think, is the toughest part, where there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of improbabilities or probabilities in there, and you're kind of being thrown into a black hole. At least now you have a little bit more influence where you can kind of practice and prepare. Although some people don't, they think they should just wing it and stuff like that. But I'd love if you can chat a little bit about some of your interview experiences and maybe go into, well, the types of interviews that you've done and enjoy, and then maybe we'll get into some like myths and misconceptions.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for having me on the on your podcast and on the phone again today. Love that. I continue to come back, so I hope you invite me again. And for those who don't know me, I have a heavy background in talent acquisition. So I want to say about 6 years of experience in recruitment, full cycle recruitment, all different types of roles from entry level positions to C-suite positions. So I've seen enough interviews, and I've coached enough leaders and employees in interviews to be able to kind of see things that I've loved and thought that were really effective, and seen things that weren't as helpful and effective for a candidate. So definitely would like to share some of those. Maybe we can start off with what Luki had said is, if you've made it this far, good for you. And I agree. People don't understand, how many or what percentage of resumes actually get picked up. So, for an entry level role right out of school, let's say for an engineering role, an EIT role, a company will get upward of 1,000 plus resumes, right? And we might, pick, not even for the phone screen, just to screen about 10% of those will make that first cut to be screened as a resume in more detail with the hiring management team. So that level or those odds, to me, tells me that like the networking aspect in the recruitment process, in the application process, it's extremely important.
Sure.
And B, consistency and applying is very important. But if you've made it this far, good for you. Like, you're on the right path. You've gone through the tedious, boring work, which is to write down a resume, because it's, I personally hate it. And again, I've been in talent acquisition for a while. One of the biggest things that some people say is wing your interview, right? Like, if you're over prepared, you're going to go and rehearse. Then I actually don't think that's the case. I think that, again, I say it differs from person to person, and it differs from role to role. But some interviews, they say on average, it takes anybody between 10 to 15 hours to effectively prepare for your interview. So that includes, researching the organization and the people that you're going to be meeting with on LinkedIn. And we all know how to do that. It's a quick, Google search, reviewing your resume to make sure that you're comfortable with all of the content there and the job posting. And then also thinking back to, I'd say not really practice verbatim, answering questions, but thinking back to notable experiences and examples of work or experiences that you have that you'd like to share in the interview, or that you suspect would be useful for you to answer certain questions, like if you've had what was your biggest achievement or your biggest failure, or a conflict you managed, etc. Another big thing that I know Luki probably is a big advocate for this, because he's told me about this before, is practicing answering the questions out loud, because it's different than just practicing it in your head. You get to reflect, whether that be with a family member. I personally like the option to record, because I'm shy and it's sometimes awkward to do it in front of a friend or a family, but recording it, and if you know that you're applying, again, something that Luki actually had said in the past was, if you're in the process that that you're applying, don't wait till you have an interview to go through that process. Every day, carve out 30 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever you can afford, and kind of practice that, so it becomes like a muscle, and you're really comfortable with the content and the notable experiences that you want to share, that your real personality can show out in an interview, and you're not stressed and almost frozen to try to find the best answer in that moment.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great feedback and advice in what you said there. And a couple of things that I'd pick on is in terms of practice, right? And you talk about like winging it and to the point of like you don't want it to feel rehearsed. I almost say like go for the point where it's so you practice so much it doesn't even sound like it's rehearsed, because there are some people where they've done it so often, and oftentimes in like any shows or people who are athletes or whatever, they make it seem so easy just because they've done it 1,000 times, right? It seems like there's zero effort, and you want your things like their tell me about yourself answer to be pretty much flawless, right? Or at least as high as you can, where you're not stumbling and ill prepared and things like that. And definitely to have a bunch of highlights where there are kind of standard areas that companies are looking for. So like teamwork, leadership, time management, difficult people, problem solving, and whatever. You're going to get one of those. Like how they ask it is going to be slightly different, and the context and the approach and whatever. So you don't want to have it verbatim, but definitely you want to have a good toolkit of answers based on your experiences from your last work
Yeah.
experience, an academic one, a personal project, or whatever it is that are in there. So definitely a lot of good things. And some people say or come to me and say, well, I practice by saying it in front of the mirror. I would say that's good, but it's not necessarily the best thing, because you don't get that feedback, because it's hard to watch yourself and give yourself feedback and
Yeah.
answer the question at the same time. Whereas what you said about a recording, well, you can pause and you can actually watch it the next day, so that the context is gone, and then you can actually really evaluate it based on what you said, not what you thought as you were trying to say something and trying to hear it back at the same time in front of a mirror or something like that, right? So I think that's great. What would you say are some of the myths and misconceptions as it relates to COVID, as it relates to interviews? So one of it is obviously that you should wing it, right? That's probably one of the things that you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
There's probably a very small percentage of the population that can actually do that. What are some other things that you would or wouldn't do in regards to interviews?
Sure. Sometimes people go in with the assumption that, they're just going to focus specifically on the resume line by not line, or when, a recruiter or hiring leader asks them, tell me about yourself or walk me through your experience, that they are asking you. And I think that this might be a misconception, that they are asking you to really take them through your resume line by line. But most people, after like about 20 seconds of doing that, they've just lost the attention of both the recruiter and the hiring manager. And it's really hard to bring that back in, right? Like,
Right.
and there's a finite time for an interview. So all the recruiter's thinking of is like, we need to transition to the next question. So you're
Yeah.
not in a really positive space, and that kind of usually happens right off the front. That's in most cases, that's usually one of the first questions that they ask. So I'd really say is, when you're preparing, what I like to do is I like to say, what is my story? Like, what's my elevator pitch? When somebody says, like, walk me through, your experience, assume they've already read your resume. You don't have to go through line by line, but maybe just say some of the notable things, and think about, in 15 seconds, like, how can I just pitch myself and give them just a high level overview of my experience? Like, I have X amount of HR experience. I specialize in A, B, C. Some of my skill sets are Z, Y, D, like whatever the case is, and leave it at that, not go kind of line by line. I find that happens more so with candidates that either don't interview often or are entry level. So that's a mistake or a misconception that happens pretty often, I'd say. Another one, and I don't know if it's a mistake or a misconception, but it's also the mindset when you go into interviews. So,
Okay.
and it's really unfortunate. Sometimes people go in, and this is pre-COVID, when you're actually in a room, sometimes people get really, really, really nervous. Okay, super nervous
Sure.
in an interview. And, it's kind of like public speaking, where the audience feels a lot of sympathy, but only in this scenario, our route is to get to know you. We just want to get to know you, right? So there's no need to feel nervous. So what I always used to tell the candidates that I'd coach while I was in recruitment, don't go in to an interview thinking that you have to wow them. It's a mutual discussion, because that might not be the best fit. Like, they might not be the best fit for you, even if they want you, right?
Sure.
So when you kind of frame your mindset that you're almost like going on a date to get to know the person mutually as well, even
Yeah,
if you are out of a job or even if you think that you really want to work for that company, it just helps ease that tension and that nervousness that you have, right? Because at the end of the day, you're really thankful that they're giving you the time, but you're also giving them your time,
sure.
right? So there has to be that mutual. I think that once that happens, there's more of a balance of power, if you want to say, when you go into the interview. So those are just two things. A couple of other things that are, kind of like no brainers, but I've been in scenarios where this has happened so often. Coming in late, and
Right.
when I mean late is like also right on time. You want to come in a little bit earlier.
Yep.
If you are interviewing during COVID, do a tech check. Do a tech check, not the day of. Do the tech check the day
Yeah.
before, and make sure things are working well, and make sure you have a professional background, good lighting, and test that out. Again, attire and clothing. Like if you're not one to dress up, ask what the dress code is.
Sure.
Make sure. Like you also don't want to come into a company that's like very casual wearing a three-piece suit.
Right.
So just it could go either way, right? So just ask. So these are some of the things that I kind of find. One of the things that also always used to kind of upset me while I would interview, not upset me on a personal level, just it's disappointing because sometimes you have a really strong candidate, is when you don't research the company for
Mhm.
whatever reason,
Mhm.
and you might have researched the company but you haven't looked at their values. Don't ask about their values in the
Right.
interview, because you always want to go in with the knowledge of the organizational values, what the company does, and also thorough knowledge on what the job entails. Like if I find a candidate asking really basic questions in an interview about the fundamentals of a job, not details, but basic questions about the fundamentals of a job, it's a red flag for me.
For
So
sure.
don't think that, these are some of the things that, that's the best forum for, if you have these basic questions, that's where your recruiter comes in before, right? They can also act as that coach for you
Mhm.
before you enter into that door or get on that Zoom call with the hiring manager.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great points in that as well. Where I like how you mentioned that it's kind of a mutual thing where you got to assess the fit for yourself and the company as well. And I guess one of the pet peeves that you mentioned, a couple of yours, where for me it's at the end, if you ask, do you have any questions for us, and they say no,
Yeah.
right? And actually, I was chatting with someone. It's like, wait, I thought I was supposed to say no because I should know everything about the company, so I shouldn't have any questions. I was like, no, 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 definitely not, because like, could you have possibly known everything off of the website and the job description? No, there's way more to the company than it's published online, right? So you should
Yeah.
be curious and interested about that. So definitely have those questions. Um, and beyond the basic ones of like, I can easily go to the website, go to the about section, find the values, you definitely need to do that minimal amount of homework. So try to have those more advanced questions. And I like what you pointed out a little bit, that actually in certain parts of the process, right, the HR person is actually there to help you get through it, right? So for those that haven't really gone through the screening process, there are sometimes multiple stages where there might be an HR recruiter that does a kind of an HR screening, just making sure, well, does your story check out? Does everything seem kosher? And then you eventually go to a hiring manager that
Yep.
actually works in the group, is the technical person or is the whatever person that is hiring. And at that point, actually, the recruiter is probably your best friend because they want you to get to the process. They want the hiring manager to say, "Wow, you gave me such amazing candidates
Yeah.
that
Exactly.
I can't even pick because they're so amazing." Because if they go back and say, "I didn't like any of the candidates," well, the recruiter didn't do a good job. So they want you to be successful. So to use that to your advantage and leverage that. Now, they might not share or be as open as you might hope, but generally that they're quite helpful in that process. So just something that people need to be aware of, that the HR person, the recruiter there is often there to help after a certain stage, right? Once you got their
Exactly.
blessing, then they're there to help. Uh,
Exactly.
tell us a little bit about what you've seen or experienced or heard, how interviews have changed during COVID. So obviously things are virtual. So you mentioned the tech check that are there, virtual backgrounds and stuff like that. Are there any other things that you recommend for folks to start doing or really emphasize while we're still in lockdown, and hopefully we'll get out of it soon enough? But I would imagine that these types of interviews are probably going to be more the norm as well, anyways.
Yeah, I mean, aside from implementing or embedding technology more so in your in the recruitment process. So, there's for example, a app or a platform that could be integrated called HireVue, right? And HireVue filters resumes in an unbiased way. It has AI chat bots, so they can easily also filter, at least at a first stage, candidates. So that, like, the COVID pandemic has kind of um, I'd say sped up the implementation of platforms like that. And why that's positive for candidates is because it minimizes barriers to entry
Right.
from a D&I perspective, right? Because there's not that unconscious bias. Right, humans will always have unconscious bias to a
Sure.
degree, right? You
Yeah.
can always make it better. So I think that's a win for everybody. I'd also say one of the things that probably has worked for people's benefit is there's a lot less nervousness meeting somebody for the first time on video than physically in a room.
Sure.
There's a lot less nervousness than, just turning on your camera, than having to find parking, figure out where this location is. Like,
Yeah.
I used to go, a day in advance or a couple of days in advance to figure that out, just to get that anxiety out, because
Right.
I also am not great in directions. Like, that's a given.
That's a
But
different
because
episode.
that's a whole other story. But you need to do that prep work, right? So it's a lot less from a nervousness perspective. So those are two big elements. So I think that it enables people to do a lot better, but at the same time, you have an added challenge of making that personal connection
Mhm.
over video. So you really need to try to make that connection quickly, and have that connectivity. And I think that some of the best ways to do that is research your audience and try to find some kind of personal piece of information that you can use and to build rapport
For sure.
quickly. So I think that is that's different, because they don't see your body, like they don't actually physically see your body language. They only see it to an extent, which is your facial expressions for the most part. So I'd say there's more pros than cons to it, but that's one of the challenges that I see, really, is that connectivity. Because a big part of it is, if you're interviewing to be a part of somebody's team, you also, it's a fact of life, right? You want to see if you're gonna get along with this person, get along with the team. A lot of times, you end up meeting people from the team, and that rapport is important to build. So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, COVID has changed the entire landscape of the working world, and
yeah.
it probably won't revert back fully to normal, where there'll probably be more and more of the initial screening done kind of by a video and things like that, which, to your point, is probably a benefit for a lot of folks, just because from a convenience perspective. But I mean, a lot of companies still like to, what is it, like, see the whites of your eyes and shake your hands and feel the warmth of that. Like,
Yeah.
there's still a lot of people who build their trust off of that. So don't think that that's going to go away anytime soon, at least not 100%. But there'll always be areas of the industry that will embrace technology fully, and those that'll kind of go a little bit more old school. So it's definitely changed things, and obviously this simple type of techniques and tricks where I've heard people, well, like my eye contact. Should I be looking at the camera or the pic or the picture here? And I've heard people say, well, just put a little sticky note with like a little arrow that says, look here, wherever it is, either at the camera or the sticky note, and that helps with just some focus in there. And to your point about the tech check, one thing that I've heard recommended is, just if you're living with a couple people, just make sure they're not doing any like extra downloads or backups or streaming like intense
Yeah.
videos or whatever at 1 o'clock exactly when your interview is scheduled, that sort of thing. And then you'll probably be in a better shape that way.
Good
Um,
call.
what are some of the pet peeves that you have experienced in interviews? So you mentioned a couple of them before, where, well, for me, it was like no questions. Being late or being on time, which means you're late. Are there others that are kind of most annoying for you?
Yeah. You know, there are some pet peeves, of course. I'd say people, and it's not so much as a pet peeve as it's something that hurts people in the interview process when we're trying to ask you something and we probe. We've asked you a question and we've probed. We're probing because you didn't give us enough
Right.
information, and we're giving you an opportunity to kind of give us that information. If you don't know or you don't have an answer, just say that, can we get back to that and let me think about it, or ask for a couple of minutes to think about it. Like, as a recruiter, personally, I view that more favorably than either saying I've already answered it or not giving an answer at all. Like, not knowing what it is and just asking to move on to the next question. So that's another thing. Kind of make sure, and if you're not strong in this, again, preparation is key. Make sure that you know those cues, like when somebody's probing. Another key thing in an interview is when a candidate answers something and it says, we would do this or we would do that. That's really telling that that person hasn't actually executed or done that something themselves.
Sure.
When you use I, done that, I would do XYZ, that is more reassuring that you've actually done that. So if you're in a scenario in an interview, and transparency is key to me, if you're in a scenario where you actually haven't personally executed or done something, you can say that, I've seen this in my team, or what I would have done in that scenario given my knowledge is that. Because interviewers, recruiters, they're trained, like they're going to know if
Mhm.
that's something that you've done, like we've done, like you and who, do you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And that's kind of one of the giving things. So again, it's like not a pet peeve, but it's just something that is, a little frustrating when you have a candidate that you would like to see them succeed. Some pet peeves, and again, these are all really petty, is body language in an interview. You're This company is giving you their time, so
Mhm.
be respectful of that. Sometimes people come in with a very arrogant attitude, or just impatient and just want to get their questions answered. That's a pet peeve for me, because if you're not fully invested or interested in the role, then don't accept, because
Sure.
you just burnt a bridge with that company,
Sure.
because that company might have the role that you actually want in about 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
So be friends with your recruiters. Don't burn that bridge. So your attitude's huge. If you're physically in, don't wear heavy cologne or perfume. People sometimes do that, and
Sure. Yeah.
make sure that, like, if you want to wear something, ask if it's a fragrance free facility or not, because it's so distracting when you're just in
Mhm.
a room with two other people, and it's sometimes hard, like, it's a first impression, so everything kind of counts at that point.
Yeah.
So those are just some pet peeves. Another pet peeve is, I know that I come prepared with a resume printout. Again, this is pre-COVID days, but I'd like for the candidate to bring me one, right?
Mhm.
One that's clean, not crumpled from their car. It just shows that they're prepared
Right.
a little bit more. So, these are just small things that kind of, when you're competing for a role, differentiate you a little bit more. So yeah, these are some pet peeves. Again, also with the salary discussion,
Mm.
it's every candidate's right to ask about salary and benefits, 100%. But sometimes when you're in an interview, it depends on whether or not the recruiter and the hiring leader are prepared to go into details of an offer, right? Sometimes
Right.
they have to review your resume a little bit further, have to look at all of the years of experience, conduct an equity analysis on their own team, so they can provide you with a range, right?
Mhm.
They can give you what the benefits are. But sometimes I've seen people really, really pushy about that,
Right.
right? And that's something that to me was always a pet peeve, because you're kind of like, it's information that we've given you, and we've given you a range, but we're not prepared to offer you an offer right now, so we're not actually going to give you a hard number.
Sure.
So those were kind of some of my pet peeves.
That's a lot of great and useful information that hopefully folks will take the advice, or at least counter that and mitigate it, so they're not on the bad end of that. What are some other pieces of interview advice that you'd have? Maybe tips and tricks, some like favorite questions that you like to ask a candidate, or favorite questions that you'd like to be asked by a candidate that really show that they're interested or worthy. What are some of those things? Or do you have any interesting standout stories of good or bad candidates?
Yeah. I mean, some of my top candidates have always come in with some kind of portfolio of work
Mhm.
or some kind of design or plan. And this is later on in the interview stage, that if they are hired specifically, this is kind of like their 30, 60, 90-day plan or a
Sure.
portfolio of their previous work if they're designers or engineers. So those are all of the things that really I'd say was a nice extra touch, because it shows that you're really committed and also gives us an additional piece of information to look at when making our decision, right? So it helps us. So that's always really good. One of the questions that I really like to ask, or I guess the questions or what I would like to get from an interview right off the bat is, I want to understand, if you are hired, what value do you bring to the team, right? Like
Sure.
right off the bat. And that could be your technical experience, but that more so could be, your soft skills, or do you have a unique personal experience that helps you bring in value right off the bat? um so that's one of the things that, and I'll phrase the question differently, but that's, some of the things that I'm interested in. I like candidates that ask strategic questions. So, questions could be like, what challenges is this department facing, for example, or what are some of the stretch goals or the strategic goals that this organization or this team is looking to achieve, or what are some of the organization's goals if over the next year or 3 years, right? That shows me that this person isn't so just fixated on a job,
Sure.
but they're looking more broadly. And when we hire for talent, you ideally want to hire talent, right? Somebody to come into the organization on the longer term, not just somebody that's going to be slotted into that role and that's kind of the end of it, right? So those questions are for me really telling about just how this person thinks, and how they think, and how they're assessing this opportunity.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it goes back to preparation and really figuring out like what is that value that you provide. Because I think that any question that you answer really should focus on that, right? So I like to coach folks that every question is actually a three-part question, where the first part of the question is whatever they ask, right? So tell me about yourself, and but the second part is, and how does that benefit the company in the role? And the third part is, and why should we hire you, right?
Yeah.
Because I had folks that basically, well, it's the question is, tell me about yourself, and how does that benefit the company in the role, and why should I hire you? Because I've had folks that basically talk about like long walks on the beach, and I play sports and whatever. Well, that doesn't really relate to the role unless the place is a travel agency where they like or require you to walk on the beach and play sports or whatever like that. And then the third part of the question, why should we hire you? A lot of folks will say, well, I thought they were going to ask me that question later. Well, how do you know? Because there's no universal standard of questions to be provided. So
Exactly.
each one should ideally stand on its own. So um, I think all that, and then back to your preparation of different sort of questions, more long-term thinking, and like things like portfolios and plans, I think are great touches. What I've seen more folks doing from a Zoom perspective is to actually prepare like a mini slideshow, right? To say it's tell me about yourself, and then they'll be like, oh, actually, I have something to share. Would you mind if I shared my screen? And be like, oh, okay, that's different because how many people actually do it? And it really doesn't take that much effort. Where like it's 3 or 5 slides and maybe a few icons here, there, a couple of words, and that probably helps guide your discussion of tell me about yourself, and it really helps to stand out with minimal effort. So I think it's those small little touches where you really thought about the company, you really thought about the person, and the value you can provide that really showcases your talents. So what are some other advice that you'd have for folks as we start to close things off on how to ace the interview, and other tips and tricks, or maybe a story that you want to share about the interviewing process?
Yeah, maybe not a specific story, but I'll just say, just general tips just to kind of summarize. And I always tell this to people in my personal life. Um, be persistent with your application, because like
Mhm.
I said, like 10 to 20%, if even, applications are picked up to look at, thoroughly, at least for the organizations that I was working at. So, if it takes you 100 applications to get to where you want to be, so be it.
Mhm.
And if you haven't interviewed in the past and you're starting to interview, you might be a little rusty at the beginning.
Mhm.
So just take every experience as a learning opportunity. And like I said, preparation and everything I think is key, especially the interview. You have an opportunity.
Right.
And I always think if you do your best and you go in, but you don't get it, then it just wasn't meant to be. But if you wing it, then maybe the outcome would have been different if you had prepared. So just
For
kind of
sure.
keep that in mind when you are being booked for interviews. And
Yeah.
also try not to do the same thing over again. If you find that one style of prep isn't working for you, or one format of your resume isn't working for you, try different things.
Yeah. And definitely all great points. So one thing that I would add is to after each interview is to reflect, right? And
Yeah.
basically take some time and write down every question that you remember and whatever you remember answering, and then maybe give yourself a score. Like, oh, well, I thought that was a 6 out of 10, it was an 8 out of 10, or whatever. And ask yourself, well, what did I do well? So that you make sure you do it again in the next interview. And then what could I have done better? So, oh, I missed this part, or I should have more emphasized that. And then make sure you do that in the next interview, so that even though the first interview might not have been great, the next one will be a little bit better, the next one will be a little bit better, and a little bit better, and then you'll eventually get that offer that you want so much. So, well, thanks so much, Nora, for sharing some of your insights and wisdoms and experience from an interviewing or an interviewer side. And yeah, any other parting words before we hopefully have you on another episode?
Best of luck to all that to everybody out there who's trying to interview and apply.
Thanks, Nora. Take care.
Thanks, Luki.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at LukiDanu, LukiDanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.